You won't believe what happened to little Livia, just 9 years old, when she was rushed to the hospital with a pain that, at first glance, seemed harmless. A sweet girl, full of dreams and a sparkle in her eyes. Shy, intelligent, passionate about animals and drawing the world in the most colorful way possible. Everything seemed normal. Until one morning Livia woke up with a strange pain in her stomach. Her mother, Camila, thought it was just a mild cramp. Her father, Roberto, said that maybe it was something she had eaten the night before. But the minutes went by, and the pain didn't go away. In fact, it only got worse. Livia curled up in bed, saying that she felt something strange growing inside her stomach. She cried softly, trying not to scare her parents. But inside she was in a panic. It was then that Camila and Roberto picked up their daughter and rushed her to the hospital in the small town of Springfield in the state of Ohio. What the doctors discovered there shocked the entire medical team. And what came next, no one could have imagined. This is a true story. A story that was almost forgotten, but that needs to be told. If you believe that some truths should come to light like this now, and subscribe to the channel, because what you're going to hear today will leave you speechless. Take a deep breath, because what's coming next will move you. Livia was a child like so many others. She played in the backyard with her little dog Luna. She loved drawing rainbows, animals, and magical forests. And she dreamed of being a veterinarian to take care of all the sick little animals. She lived with her parents in a modest house on the outskirts of Springfield, a quiet town where almost everyone knows each other. She was healthy, active, and full of energy. She had never had any serious health problems. But that Wednesday morning something wasn't right. Livia woke up with no appetite, with a haggard face. And right after breakfast she said in a low voice, "Mom, my stomach hurts, different, it feels like there's something inside it." Camila tried to calm her daughter down. She made some tea and put a warm water bottle in it. But the pain didn't go away, and Livia's look said it all. That afternoon she didn't want to eat. She was weak and couldn't even stand up. At that moment, Camila looked at her husband with teary eyes and said, "We need to go to the hospital now." Livia started to sweat coldly. She writhed in bed, her body bent over in pain. With teary eyes and a trembling voice she said, "It hurts, Mommy, it hurts a lot." Camila held her daughter in her arms, trying to stay calm. Roberto, her father, immediately called the local hospital. But since Springfield was a small town, there was only one general practitioner on duty at night. Even so, they didn't wait. They hurriedly dressed Livia, got in the car, and went straight to the emergency room. When they arrived, the doctor on duty, an experienced but visibly tired man, quickly examined Livia. He immediately noticed something strange. The girl's belly was slightly swollen. This was unusual, especially for a child that age. He gave her an injection to relieve the pain and, worried, recommended, "Tomorrow, as soon as it gets light, take her to the Central Hospital in Columbus. This needs to be evaluated by more resources." And so they did. At 6 in the morning, the parents boarded the first bus with their daughter to Columbus, the capital of the state of Ohio. During the journey, Livia did not say a word. She was pale, weak, and almost without strength. Camila held her daughter's hand tightly, while her eyes would not stop watering. Roberto, with his face turned towards the window, tried to contain his despair. When they arrived at the Central Hospital, they were greeted by a highly respected pediatrician at the unit, Dr. Elizabeth. She listened to every detail and asked quick and precise questions. In a few minutes she made a decision. "We are going to admit Livia now. I want a complete ultrasound, blood count, and CT scan. I'm not going to risk it. This needs to be investigated very carefully." While Livia was being taken away by the nurses, her parents remained in the waiting room. Camila, sitting with her head down, prayed silently, asking for only one thing, that it was nothing serious. Roberto paced back and forth, hands in his pockets, his steps quickening. Every minute seemed like an eternity. Hours later, the exams began to be analyzed. It was then that one of the residents called Dr. Elizabeth to see the images. She approached the screen and with a frown said in a low voice, "This here is not common." She immediately asked for the person in charge of the imaging department to come. Minutes later, the specialist arrived, adjusted the screen, zoomed in, compared it with the blood test. The silence in the room became dense. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the same image. "Call the pediatrics team. I want more opinions." The second doctor came in, and then a third. In a short time, 3 specialists were around the screen, discussing in low voices, reviewing the exams, looking at each other with increasingly tense expressions. On the other side of the hospital, Livia had already been taken back to her room. She was drowsy because of the medication, but the pain was still there, stronger than before. Camila, now at the bedside, cried softly, stroking her daughter's hair. Roberto, standing with tears in his eyes, held back his tears with all his might. But inside he was already falling apart. And he had no idea what he was about to discover. They didn't know what was happening. And that, for any parent, is the worst kind of despair. Almost 2 hours after the last exam, Dr. Elizabeth entered the room. Her expression was even more serious than before. She approached the bed, examined Livia with extreme care, and then turned to the parents. "Mr. Roberto, Miss Camila, can you come with me to the conference room, please?" At that moment, Camila's heart almost stopped. She knew, as every mother knows, that when a doctor calls for a private conversation, it is rarely good news. In the room there were 2 doctors, Dr. Elizabeth and the imaging specialist. The room was silent. "Tets, we found something. Something unusual in the tests," said the doctor in a calm but firm voice. "Before we give any diagnosis, we want to perform one more test. A more specific, highly precise procedure. We need to be sure of what we are seeing." Roberto, trying to understand the seriousness, asked directly, "But, will my daughter be okay?" The doctor hesitated for a second, and then answered, looking him in the eyes, "She is stable. But we need to act quickly." That same night, Livia was taken to have an advanced ultrasound with contrast. The test was long, delicate, and the silence only made the anguish increase. Camila, sitting in the waiting room, could no longer contain her tears. Roberto, with his elbows on his knees and his hands on his face, tried not to break down. Deep down, they felt that something serious was coming. But not even in their worst nightmares could they have imagined what was about to be revealed. A little before 11 p.m., the exam was ready. Dr. Elizabeth entered the room holding an envelope. Her steps were slow. And just by the expression on her face, it was clear that what was coming next would not be easy to hear. "Please, have a seat." Camila squeezed her husband's hand. They both looked at each other in silence. The doctor took a deep breath. "What I'm going to say now may shock you, but you need to be prepared." She started to open the envelope, pulled out the images, but before she could continue, a nurse rushed into the room. "Doctor, I'm sorry, but we have an emergency. It's serious." Elizabeth stopped, looked at her parents and said, "Just give me a few minutes. I'll be right back, I promise." And she left the room. Time seemed frozen inside that hospital. The hours passed slowly, dragged out, while Livia remained in the room, now with her belly even more swollen, and feeling an even more intense pain. Camila sat next to the bed, stroking her daughter's hair and whispering words of comfort, trying to appear strong. But inside, she was broken. Roberto in the hallway paced back and forth. His face was sweaty, his eyes red, and his heart racing. It was only around 20 past midnight that Dr. Elizabeth returned, with a clipboard in her hand, and an expression that immediately made the parents get up. "Let's talk in the hallway, please." They left the room. The doctor closed the door behind her. And then, she took a deep breath. She paused for a long time, and began to speak. " The test revealed something that surprised us deeply. It's not an infection. nor a common gastrointestinal problem. Dr. Elizabeth began, her voice firm but full of caution. Camila and Roberto looked at each other in complete silence. Time seemed to stop there in that conversation. Camila. Roberto, she continued, choosing each word with extreme care. Livia's body is showing clear signs of pregnancy. The shock was immediate. Camila took a step back, holding on to her husband's arm to keep from falling. Roberto remained silent, his face pale, his eyes wide, unable to process it. "What do you mean?" he asked, almost speechless. "That's not possible. She's only 10 years old." The doctor nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She explained that the ultrasound showed the presence of a developing fetus. A very advanced pregnancy, already close to delivery. Camila became desperate. She began to mumble things that not even she understood. No. This must be a mistake. My daughter, she's just a child, she would never. This can't be happening. But it was. The exams were clear. There was a heartbeat. There was movement. There was life. It was then that Roberto asked the question that no one had dared to say out loud until then. Who did this to my daughter? The silence that followed was deafening. From that moment on, the case was no longer just a medical one. Now it was also a police case. The hospital management was notified. A social worker was called. And the Everett police were notified immediately. But what was yet to come was even more frightening. During the preparations for the birth, with exams, tests, and monitoring of the baby, one of the doctors noticed something strange in the images. They called a specialized obstetrician to review the details. A few minutes later, Dr. Elizabeth returned to the room. She looked at the parents, visibly dejected, and said seriously, "We need to talk. We discovered something unusual. Something we've never seen before in a child pregnancy." Roberto's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What else?" The doctor didn't answer right away. She asked the two of them to go back into the private room. The atmosphere was heavy, dense, almost unbearable. And it was at that moment that the entire hospital seemed to go into shock. The news that a girl of only 10 years old was pregnant spread like lightning through the hallways. Nurses looked at each other in silence. Doctors walked around with papers in their hands, muttering, "How is this possible?" Camila couldn't stop crying. She repeated like a mantra, "How did this happen without me noticing?" Oh, she was always so calm. Always with her dolls in her room. Always so innocent. Roberto, on the other hand, remained silent. But in his eyes there was a mixture of deep pain and contained fury. He wanted answers. He wanted justice. And, above all, he wanted to protect his daughter, even if, at that moment, it was already too late to prevent what had happened. The doctors knew they couldn't waste time. Livia's pregnancy was already in an advanced stage, and the pain was becoming more and more intense. The team decided to start a new series of detailed exams, while they carefully evaluated what type of delivery would be best. It was then that the head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique, stopped in front of the last ultrasound images. He frowned. He discreetly called Dr. Elizabeth and pointed to the screen. "Look at this here. The baby looks healthy, but this formation on the side, that's not normal." An unusual shadow appeared in Livia's abdominal region. Something that hadn't been visible in the previous exams. Something that seemed out of place. Dr. Enrique didn't hesitate. "Request an MRI. Immediately." While the exams were being done, the doctors avoided any explanations to the parents. They didn't want to feed their despair, at least not yet. Hours passed. The MRI images arrived. And when the reports began to be analyzed, the doctor's room fell into absolute silence. One of the specialists, after minutes of observation, murmured, This doesn't make any sense." The images showed not only the baby, but also a strange structure next to the uterus. A kind of living mass with an organic appearance. But no heartbeat. Without any movement of its own. Dr. Elizabeth was paralyzed for a few seconds. I've never seen anything like this. This goes far beyond an early pregnancy. There was something else inside that girl's body. Something that no one could explain. Something that somehow shouldn't be there. Faced with the uncertainty and urgency, the doctors made a decision. Let's go to the operating room. Let's open it up. We need to see for ourselves what's happening. And while the surgical center was being prepared, without anyone knowing yet, the truth was approaching. A truth so absurd and frightening that it would forever change the lives of Camila, Roberto, and the entire team that was about to witness what would come next. The night was already taking over Everett. In the hospital, the atmosphere was tense, silent, almost suffocating. The team opted for an emergency cesarean section. Livia's body, at only 10 years old, did not have the physical structure to support a natural birth. She was taken to the surgery room drowsy, with her eyes heavy from the sedation, but still lucid enough to ask in a weak voice, "Why are so many people looking at me like that?" Camila, the mother, was not allowed to go in, but she remained outside, standing, motionless, with her eyes glued to the door, as if her silent presence could protect her daughter. She was no longer crying. Now, there was only a deep emptiness on his face. Roberto was leaning against the opposite wall, arms crossed, fists clenched, jaw clenched. He stared at the floor, but his mind was burning with questions that still had no answers. The police had already been called, and an officer was positioned discreetly in the hallway, observing everything. The entire city still didn't know, but in that room, something never seen before was about to be revealed. A police officer and a social worker were already on their way to the hospital. The situation now involved more than medicine. But at that moment, none of that was a priority. The focus was on Livia, and what was about to happen in that room would change the lives of everyone inside forever. Dr. Elizabeth was coordinating the final adjustments with the team. Dr. Enrique, the obstetrician in charge, would take over the operation. The monitors were already in place, recording every heartbeat, every vital sign. The atmosphere was dense. The silence, absolute. Everyone knew that this was no ordinary procedure. There was something different there. Something that could not be explained with science alone. The anesthesiologist gave the signal. Dr. Enrique began the incision with precision, sliding the scalpel over Livia's small abdomen. Each layer was carefully opened. Each movement carried the weight of tension in the air. And it was at that exact moment that Dr. Enrique's eyes widened. He stopped, stared at the monitor and murmured almost voicelessly, "My God." The team looked at each other, alarmed. Dr. Elizabeth approached and looked over the surgical field. What she saw made her instinctively take a step back. There was something else there, besides the baby. A strange formation as if it were attached to the uterus, but that was clearly not part of the pregnancy. "What is it?" Dr. Elizabeth asked in a suspicious whisper. Dr. Enrique didn't answer. He continued the operation, now even more cautious. The baby seemed fine, but that other structure could not be ignored. The atmosphere inside the operating room became heavier by the second. Livia's heartbeat remained stable. And finally the baby began to be removed. And then, the most anticipated sound of the night, a weak but clear cry. The newborn was a boy, small, weighing just over 2 kilos, breathing with difficulty but alive. He was immediately taken to the incubator, where a pediatric team was already prepared. But everyone's gaze remained fixed on what was still inside Livia's body. A mass, wrapped in a membrane, with no heartbeat, without movement, with an appearance so abnormal that it paralyzed even the most experienced professionals. That was when Dr. Enrique, still looking at it, said, "As soon as we stabilize Livia and the baby, we'll remove this and send it for immediate analysis." He then looked at Dr. Elizabeth seriously with a firm but frightened voice. "Because honestly, I have no idea what it is. Livia, still under the effects of anesthesia, was sleeping soundly, without having the slightest idea of what was happening around her. Inside the operating room, however, the mood was far from one of relief. There were no smiles. There was no celebration. The tension was visible in every look. The team's attention was now focused on that abnormal formation that still remained inside the girl's body. Dr. Enrique approached the surgical field again and, with slow movements, began to carefully remove the tissue around the structure. Dr. Elizabeth, with a choked voice, broke the silence. This doesn't look like a cyst or a tumor. It looks like something organic, but completely deformed. Everyone's eyes turned to the surgical monitor. The camera projected that disturbing image in real time. The formation was connected to the uterus by a kind of fibrous cord, and it was covered by a gelatinous, almost translucent membrane. But the most disturbing thing was what could be seen inside that membrane. A structure with an undefined shape, but that vaguely resembled a body. An incomplete body, as if he had tried to develop, but had been interrupted in the middle of the process. Dr. Enrique took a step back. He slowly took off his gloves, and, still with his eyes fixed on the screen, he asked, "Call the head of pathology, and prepare an immediate biopsy. This needs to be analyzed now." While tension took over the operating room, outside, Camila and Roberto were still waiting for any news. For a moment, the baby's crying echoed through the hallway. Camila put her hands to her mouth, overcome by a mixture of relief and despair. She looked at her husband and said, with tears in her eyes, "Did you hear?" he cried. "Our grandson, or—" She couldn't finish. As if she was still trying to process all of that. As if she still didn't know if she was living a nightmare, or something even more incomprehensible. It was at that moment that the police chief arrived, accompanied by a social worker. He walked over to Roberto and Camila, maintaining a formal but respectful tone. "As soon as Livia is conscious, we'll need to talk to her." Calmly. "But we need to understand what happened." He paused, then added seriously, "If she's pregnant, someone did this to her." The social worker approached Camila, held her shoulder and said softly, "The priority now is Livia. She's going to need a lot of psychological support, and so are you." At that moment, the door to the room opened. Dr. Enrique appeared first. He was pale. His gaze was lost. He walked up to Livia's parents and spoke in a low, controlled but weighty voice. "The baby is fine. A boy. He was taken to the neonatal ICU. He is breathing with difficulty, but he is strong." Camila squeezed her husband's hand. But before they could ask anything, the doctor continued, "But we found something besides the baby. An unusual formation. We are still trying to understand what it is." Roberto frowned. "A formation? What does that mean?" Dr. Enrique answered sincerely, "It means that there was something else inside Livia. Something that is not part of a normal pregnancy. We have already sent the material for analysis. And as soon as we have the results, I promise to explain everything clearly. But, for now, not even we know what we are dealing with." Camila's eyes met Roberto's. No words were spoken, but the look on their faces said it all. Fear, confusion, disbelief. It was as if they were trapped in a nightmare from which they could not wake up. And the truth is that nothing, absolutely nothing, would prepare them for what was about to be revealed. Because what had been removed from Livia's womb was not only inexplicable, it was impossible. In the hospital's pathology department, an emergency protocol was activated. The material removed from the girl was isolated in a sterile capsule, sealed and escorted by one of the laboratory's most experienced technicians. The atmosphere in the corridors was tense. There was not only scientific curiosity, there was fear. Something was wrong there, and no one could explain what. Dr. Roberto, head of pathology, received the contents as soon as he arrived at the laboratory. The first images of the structure made him immediately stop what he was doing. He frowned. And without hesitation he called two embryology specialists. At first glance, the formation resembled a malformed fetus. But there was something different. An incomplete symmetry. A pattern. As if there had been a deliberate attempt at replication. It wasn't just a malformation. It seemed like something planned. Incomplete, yes, but with purpose. Meanwhile, in the hospital room, Livia was beginning to wake up. Her eyes opened slowly. The light bothered her. Camila's face appeared before her, with teary eyes and a trembling smile on her lips. "Daughter," she said softly, "the baby is alive. It's okay, my love." Livia blinked a few times, trying to understand. "The baby," she repeated, her voice weak. But then, the relief on her face disappeared. Her expression changed. As if a memory had flashed through her mind like lightning. She put her hand to her belly and murmured almost without a voice, "There was someone else there." Camila frowned, confused. "What do you mean, daughter? What do you mean by that?" But Livia didn't answer. She turned her face away. She stared at the white ceiling. She knew what she had felt during all those months. The nightmares. The constant feeling of being watched from the inside. The inexplicable cold, even on the hottest days. On the lower floor the test continued. The first genetic results left the specialists in shock. The structure analyzed showed genetic traits identical to those of Livia, and also of the baby. It was as if a duplication had begun, but was interrupted in the middle of the process. One of the embryologists examining the material murmured with a choked voice, "This is not just a fetal malformation. It is an attempt at symbiosis." But it failed. Dr. Roberto looked at the monitor, took a deep breath and replied, "Or worse, something trying to grow, based on something we cannot understand." In the surgical center, Dr. Enrique was already reading the report carefully. His face was serious. "Well." He turned to Dr. Elizabeth and said in a low voice, "We cannot let this leave here." "Not yet." She just nodded. There was much to be investigated before any truth could be revealed. Outside the hospital, night had already fallen over Everett. The air was cold, but what chilled him inside was the silence in the hallways. Roberto paced restlessly. Camila remained seated, staring at the ground and her arms crossed over her chest. It was as if she could no longer support the weight of her own body, or the weight of doubt. It was then that the social worker returned. And with her came the officer in charge of the case. Both of them had a more serious expression than before. Something had changed. "We need to talk to Livia," the police chief said. "There are signs that this pregnancy was not consensual. But there's more." He paused briefly as if searching for the right words. Camila looked up, apprehensive. "We received an anonymous tip 3 months ago. It said that Livia was being watched. That something strange had happened after she disappeared for 3 days, right at the beginning of her pregnancy." Camila was startled. "That's impossible. She's never been away from home. She's never told us anything about it." The social worker took a deep breath, bent down until she was at Camila's height and said softly, "Maybe, because she doesn't even know for sure. When the trauma is too intense, the mind blocks it. It creates holes. It erases it. It protects us from the pain." Meanwhile, upstairs, Livia was alone in the recovery room. The room was almost dark. Only the low sound of the monitors broke the silence. She looked out the window. Tears flowed silently. But it wasn't physical pain. It was something she couldn't explain. Suddenly, her reflection in the glass changed. For a second, Livia saw another pair of eyes behind hers. Fixed, dark, empty. She blinked. And she was alone again. Or at least, that's what she thought. In the hospital's analysis center, the technicians worked in silence. One of the genetic samples collected during the cesarean section had been isolated for study. And it was there that something unexpected began to happen. Under the microscope, the inert tissue began to move. One of the sensors triggered a subtle alert. The technician in charge approached calmly, thinking it was just a calibration error. But as he adjusted the focus, he turned pale. "Dr. Roberto, the tissue, it's moving." The head of pathology, who was already leaving with a report in hand, came back in a hurry. He looked through the lens, and the blood seemed to freeze in his veins. What he saw was not just movement. It was spontaneous cellular electrical activity. Microscopic impulses ran through the sample, as if tiny nerves were trying to reconnect with each other. "This is not ordinary regeneration," he murmured without taking his eyes off the microscope. Beside it, one of the monitors showed a graph with rhythmic oscillations, similar to heartbeats. But that was not a heart. It was something different. At the same time, in the recovery room, Livia woke up abruptly. She sat up in bed, gasping for breath, her eyes wide with terror. She looked around, confused. For a few seconds she didn't recognize where she was. "He's back," she whispered almost without realizing it. The nurse on duty approached, frightened. "Livia? What did you say? Who's back?" Livia didn't answer. She just put her hand to her abdomen. There was no pain, but there was a strange pressure, as if something was pulsing inside. Fragments of memory began to come back. Flashes of a dark room. Voices whispering in a language she didn't know. Blue and red lights swirling around her body. The feeling that someone, or something, had invaded her mind and body. Meanwhile, Livia's parents were taken to a private room. The police chief was waiting for them. What he was about to say would change everything. "We have security camera footage from the time Livia disappeared," said the police chief, connecting a pen drive to the computer in the hospital room. The video began to play. The image showed Livia walking alone on a dirt road, in the darkness of the early morning. Her eyes fixed straight ahead. Her body rigid. It was as if she were in a trance. Suddenly she stopped. Her body froze. And then, the camera lights flashed. The image disappeared for a few seconds. When it came back, Livia was no longer there. There was complete silence in the room. "This was recorded a few kilometers from here," explained the police chief, his voice firm. "And there is no logical explanation for what happened in the meantime." Camila covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide. Roberto just shook his head, unable to process what he was seeing. The sun was starting to rise outside. But inside the hospital, time seemed frozen. Livia was still unconscious, under sedation and strict observation. On the lower floor in the neonatal ICU, the baby was fighting to survive. Too small. Too fragile. Connected to tubes and machines that tried to do for him what his little body could not yet do. In the waiting room, Camila had not slept a wink. Roberto paced back and forth, restless, until the door opened. The police chief returned. "We have some information," he announced, straight to the point. Camila stood up immediately, her heart pounding. "What did they find out?" The police chief sighed deeply and said with regret, "Livia was admitted to the hospital with severe abdominal pain and clear signs of physical trauma, old injuries, and recent ones. The expert analysis is being done, but we are almost certain that the pregnancy was forced." The ground disappeared under Camila's feet. "Does that mean that someone?" "Yes," the police chief confirmed, his eyes heavy. "Someone abused your daughter. Repeatedly. And it started long before the pregnancy." Roberto ran to hold his wife, who almost fell. Neither of them could say a single word. "We need to talk to her as soon as it is safe," the police chief continued. "But everything will be done with psychological support. The priority now is to protect her." Upstairs, Dr. Enrique was arguing with the social worker and the hospital psychiatrist. The biopsy of the mass removed along with the baby was still being analyzed. But what worried them most at that moment was Livia's mental state. "She may be dissociating from reality," said the psychiatrist. "It's not uncommon in cases like this for the child to create false memories, blocks, even parallel worlds as a defense mechanism. The social worker crossed her arms, tense. The thing is, no one knows where she was during the days she disappeared. And the scariest thing, no adult noticed. Not even her mother. At the end of that morning, Livia woke up. Her eyes opened slowly. The light made her blink. She looked around, not understanding where she was. She tried to get up, but her body didn't respond. The nurses ran, called the doctors. Camila was called to the room. But before entering, the psychiatrist grabbed her arm and spoke firmly and empathetically. Try not to pressure her. She will talk when she is ready. But you need to be prepared for what she might tell you. Camila nodded with a lump in her throat. She took a deep breath and went in. Livia looked at her mother and, for the second time since giving birth, she cried. Mommy? Her voice came out weak, like a whisper scratched by time. Camila couldn't hold it in. She knelt down beside the bed, pulling her daughter into a gentle hug, but full of restrained despair. I'm here, my love. You're safe now. I swear, no one will hurt you again. For a few minutes, the two remained silent. But there was something that needed to be said. Livia then whispered, her eyes fixed on the window. I don't remember everything. But sometimes I dream. I dream of a dark room, of someone calling me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. Camila closed her eyes. The pain was unbearable. And the baby? She asked hesitantly. Livia hesitated too. Then, slowly, she put her hand to her now empty belly. He's still crying. In here. Even after leaving. In the hospital's boardroom, the doctors were gathered around a report. The preliminary results of the biopsy had arrived. Dr. Enrique read them in silence. Then he looked up and said with a heavy voice, the tissue we removed is not a tumor. It's not just a fetal malformation either. There are genetic traces of a second fetus. A parasitic twin, possibly. Everyone looked at each other. The social worker was the first to react. Are you saying she was pregnant with two? Dr. Enrique took a deep breath and continued. In a way, yes. But only one was born. The other developed until about 5 months. Then it stopped. But it was not absorbed as usually happens. It remained inactive, connected to the uterus by a rudimentary structure, as if it had stayed to observe. The silence that formed seemed to weigh tons. This raises a delicate question, he added. If there was more than one fetus, there may have been more than one episode of violence. The atmosphere in the room froze. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Livia watched the world through the window. Outside, life went on. Cars passed by, people walked by, indifferent. No one knew what she carried inside. In the neonatal nursery, her baby slept. Small, fragile, but with a strange presence hovering around the incubator, as if something there was not finished. Livia knew. That story had not started on the day of the birth. And, definitely, it would not end there. 3 days had passed. Livia was still hospitalized, accompanied by psychologists, social workers and nurses who took turns day and night. The baby remained stable in the neonatal ICU, fed through a tube. Camila never left the hospital. She slept on a hard chair next to the bedroom door, as if her silent vigil could keep the real world inside, and the other world outside. That morning the child psychologist came in again. She brought with her a blank notebook, colored pencils, and a kind look. She sat down in front of Livia, placing the material on the side table. Do you want to draw today? Livia looked at the paper. Her fingers moved slowly to the black pencil. And without saying a word, she began to draw. First a bed. Then a door, half open. Shadows behind it. And 2 eyes, large, empty, without pupils, peering through the crack. The psychologist frowned slightly. Who are those eyes, Livia? She stopped. The pencil fell from her hand. They never left. Livia hesitated. She picked up the blue pencil that was on the table. The tip trembled between her fingers. She started with a line. Then circular strokes. thin lines and heavy shadows. She didn't say a word for several minutes. When she finished, she turned the drawing to the psychologist. Dr. Elizabeth observed it in silence. It was a small room. No windows, a bed in the corner, a locked door, and in the center, a chair. Someone was sitting on it. There was no face, just eyes and shadow, watching. "Does this place exist, Livia?" Dr. Elizabeth asked, her voice soft. The girl remained silent. Then she answered without looking at anyone. "That's where he took me, when he said I was special." The psychologist held her breath for a second. Who? "I don't know his name. He just said, for me to call him Uncle." At the police chief's office, the expert reports arrived with more details. Injuries in different stages. Compatible with continuous abuse. Old bruises. Recent marks. Toxicology tests identified sedatives. Substances that could have kept Livia unconscious for hours. Maybe days. Roberto was there. His jaw clenched. His eyes were red but without tears. "And you still don't know who did this?" he asked, trying to contain the anger in his voice. The police chief nodded heavily. "We're following some lines. We already know that she was missing for about 3 days. School records indicate that on some mornings she would disappear for hours and only reappear at the end of classes, when it was time to go home." He turned the monitor toward her. "Cameras from a gas station 80 kilometers from here show a girl who looks a lot like Livia getting into a white car. The driver hasn't been identified yet, but we got part of the license plate. We're tracking her." Meanwhile, in the psychologist's office, Livia had started drawing again. This time a crib. Inside, a baby with its eyes closed. And next to it, an adult with a mask. Plain mask. Expressionless. "He watched everything," she whispered, almost as if she were confessing something forbidden. Dr. Elizabeth remained silent. "Livia, do you remember where this place was?" The girl thought for a few seconds. "It was far away. Very far away. The car shook a lot sometimes. But I remember the smell. The smell of wet earth. And, every now and then, you could hear a bell." At night in the hospital room, Dr. Enrique entered with calm steps. He sat down next to the girl's bed with an almost paternal care. "Hi, Livia. How are you feeling today?" She looked at him, tired. "Better, I think." He smiled gently. "Your baby is doing well. He's fighting. But, he misses you." Livia looked away, uncomfortable. I'm afraid to look at him." "Why?" She took a while. Her hands gripped the sheet tightly. "Because I don't know if it will remind me of everything I've lived. Or of everything I've lost." Livia's words kept echoing in Camila's head, even hours later. In the neonatal ICU, Camila was allowed by the nurse to approach the incubator. She placed her hand on the glass, looking at her grandson. The baby, so small and fragile, opened his eyes. For a moment, emotion overcame her. But then, Camila stopped. Something in the baby's gaze made her shiver. He looked straight into her eyes without blinking. Fixed it, as if he recognized her. A chill ran down Camila's spine. She stepped back, took a deep breath, and whispered, "You're going to have a different life. You're going to grow up surrounded by love. I promise." Outside the hospital, a discreet police car pulled up. The officer got out with a brown envelope in his hands. Inside were the results of the genetic test that had been done in a hurry. He stopped for a moment on the sidewalk, opened the envelope, and read it again. The expression on his face was one of total disbelief. "This can't be right." He closed the envelope, took a deep breath, and went inside. In the hospital cafeteria, now empty and isolated from the hubbub of the hallways, the police chief met with Dr. Enrique, the psychologist, and the social worker. "The lab redid the test 3 times, the police chief said. And the data is consistent." He looked around before continuing. "The baby shares genetic traits with the mother, as if they were half-siblings. A heavy silence filled the room. Dr. Enrique placed the report on the table in disbelief. Does this mean the aggressor could be within the family itself? The police chief nodded. It means we need to look inside. And fast. Livia is at risk. And so is the baby. The social worker turned to the psychologist. She still hasn't said any names? None, the professional replied with regret. But everything indicates that she knew who it was. The type of blockage we are dealing with here is typical of intrafamily abuse. The mind protects. It closes doors. It creates versions. It pretends it wasn't real. But it was. At the end of that afternoon, something changed. Livia asked to see the baby. For the first time since the birth. Camila stayed by her side, while the nurse slowly pushed the wheelchair to the ICU. When they arrived, Livia hesitated in front of the incubator. She stood there still, breathing with difficulty. Then she approached, very slowly, her eyes fixed on the baby. "Does he look like me?" she asked. Camila smiled gently. A little, the nose, the chin. Livia nodded thoughtfully. But she didn't take her eyes off him. He's so small. And yet, it seems like he knows everything. Camila looked at her daughter, confused. "What do you mean, daughter?" Livia didn't answer right away. "When I close my eyes, I see the same dark room. I hear the same whispers. But now, he's there too." Camila felt her skin go cold. "Who, Livia?" Livia put her hand on the glass, almost touching the baby. "Will he grow up?" Livia asked, looking through the glass. "Yes, he will," Dr. Enrique replied sweetly. "He will grow up strong." She was silent for a moment. Then her voice came out as a whisper, almost muffled. "And will he know what happened?" "Only if you want to tell him, Livia." The girl then touched the glass with her fingertips, as if the gesture could protect him. And she murmured, almost inaudibly, "I don't want him to grow up afraid to close his eyes." Later, Roberto was called for a private conversation with the police chief. The mood was heavy. The police chief seemed exhausted, but still firm. "Roberto, we need to do a DNA test. As protocol. As Livia's father." Roberto frowned. Tension filled the air. "Are you insinuating that I'm not accusing anyone," the police chief replied cautiously. "But the forensic data indicate that the attacker could be a first-degree relative. It's our duty to eliminate possibilities." Roberto took a deep breath. His face was tense, his eyes wounded. "Do whatever you have to do. I want the truth as much as you do." That night, Livia had a nightmare. She woke up screaming, sweaty, her heart racing. Camila ran to the bedroom. She found her daughter curled up, shaking. "He would catch me when I was sleeping," the girl whispered repeatedly. Camila sat up in bed, hugging her tightly. "It's okay now, my love. He won't catch you again." But Livia looked up, her eyes wide, filled with fear. "He said no one would believe me. That I was just a confused child. That if I told anyone, they would say it was a lie." Camila felt her world crumble once again. "I believe you, daughter. I believe you. Always." 2 days later, the results of Roberto's DNA test came back. Negative. He was not the baby's biological father. Camila almost collapsed. A painful relief washed over her chest. But with it came an even darker question. If it wasn't Roberto, then who was it? The police chief expanded the investigation. He cross-referenced school records, schedules, family members' names, past visits. And then, something came up. A new DNA request was filed. This time for Livia's older brother, 21 years old. He had left home months earlier, after a fight with his father. He had been away ever since. According to school records, he had been absent for over 40 days. The same period in which Livia displayed strange behavior at school. She would disappear from class, then reappear hours later, always close to the time she was supposed to go home. When Camila found out about this, she froze. It took her a while to speak. "That is impossible. They grew up together. took care of her when I was away. He was so affectionate with her. The words disappeared, drowned in shock, in guilt, in fear. Meanwhile, alone in the hospital room, Livia drew another sheet of paper, another piece of the truth, another fragment of the darkness that little by little she was beginning to reveal. This time Livia drew two dolls. A large one with a smile on its face, a small one with tears. In the corner of the sheet, with her handwriting still uncertain, she wrote, "He said it was love." Time stood still, because the truth was now too close, and no one was prepared for what it would bring. On a quiet Friday morning, Livia's brother's DNA test was ready. Dr. Roberto handed the envelope directly to the police chief, who opened it right there, in front of Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Enrique and Camila. Complete match. The baby's biological father was Livia's older brother. The police chief closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath and said, "Request the warrant." Now, the boy was temporarily living at an uncle's house in another city. He was easily located and taken to the police station without resistance. During the interrogation, he sat in front of the police chief, impassive. "She never said no," he murmured. "She liked me? It was just a joke at first." The silence that followed was deafening. The police officer firmly replied, "She was 10 years old. You knew what you were doing." The brother lowered his head. His voice was lower. "No one looked at her the way I did. I protected her. She said she loved me, that she trusted me." The police officer interrupted. He didn't need anything else. That was enough. At the hospital, Camila received the news from the hands of the social worker. She read the information once. Then she went into the bathroom and vomited. She sat down on the cold floor. She collapsed. The boy I raised, who I rocked in my arms, who I taught to walk. How could he do this to his own sister? The words came out broken with pain. She cried as if she was going to break down. Later it was Roberto who told his daughter the truth. Livia was sitting on the bed, her eyes lost in the window. Dr. Elizabeth, the psychologist, was at her side. Roberto approached cautiously. His eyes were red, but his voice was firm. "Daughter? The test confirmed it. It was your brother." Livia didn't cry. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, quietly, almost breathless, she whispered, "So I'm not crazy." Dr. Elizabeth leaned in gently. "You never were, Livia. No one thought you were." She closed her eyes. And for the first time, the silence inside her seemed different. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Livia took a deep breath. For the first time, there was a trace of relief in her voice. "I tried to forget. I tried to believe it was just a nightmare. But every time he came close, I felt a hole inside me." She closed her eyes. And now that hole has turned into a baby. Days later, the story exploded in the city. 10-year-old girl pregnant by her own brother. The headlines took over the tabloids, with no respect for the pain that was hidden behind the words. Camila had to deactivate all social media. People started showing up in front of the hospital. Some out of simple curiosity. Others, in shock, expressed outrage. A minority, out of empathy. The hospital reinforced security. Livia was transferred to an isolated room. Protected. Silent. The courts acted quickly. The public prosecutor's office formalized the complaint. Livia's brother would be charged with rape of a vulnerable person, false imprisonment, psychological threat. In a press conference, the prosecutor in the case, Dr. Elizabeth, was direct. "This is a monstrous crime. But, unfortunately, it is not rare. Our mission now is to protect this girl and ensure that this baby does not bear the weight of the crime that created him." In the last scene of that day, Livia was taken back to the ICU. The baby. He was breathing without machines. She approached silently. Camila remained behind, respecting the moment. Livia rested her forehead against the glass of the incubator. Her eyes were calm. but they carried a world of pain and strength. I didn't choose you, and you didn't choose to be born this way. But if someone has to break this chain, let it be us. Then she smiled. Small, weak, but real. At that moment, Livia stopped being just a victim. She was taking her first steps towards becoming something even stronger, a survivor. 6 weeks had passed since the birth. Livia was discharged from the hospital, but under strict conditions. Intensive psychological monitoring, frequent visits from the social worker, reinforced security. She did not return to her old house. That place, where everything happened. It was no longer safe. Not physically, not emotionally. The Child Protection Council provided a shelter in a remote neighborhood. There, she and Camila could try to start over. Roberto, by joint decision with the courts, remained temporarily in the old house, cooperating with the police, preserving evidence that was still under analysis. Livia's brother was in jail. The case against Livia's brother was moving forward quickly. The medical reports, the drawings, the exams, the testimonies, everything documented, everything clear. But a doubt, silent but insistent, hung in the air. What would be done with the baby? In the new house, small, safe, quiet, Livia kept the curtains in the room always closed. The crib was there next to the bed. The boy, now weighing just over 2.5 kilos, had been discharged from the neonatal ICU. He was healthy. He cried at night. He slept little. And he continued to be an enigma to his own mother. Livia watched him from afar, as if facing something sacred and profane at the same time. Camila was the one who did everything. She bathed him, changed his diapers, fed him. Livia watched but without getting close. Until one night, after a more intense crying fit. "I want to hold him," said Livia, her voice trembling. Camila, surprised, stopped. And then, carefully, she placed the baby in her arms. For the first time, Livia didn't tremble. She stayed there, swaying gently, watching the little face fall asleep. "He's not to blame, right?" "None," Camila replied. Livia then took a deep breath. "Then, I'll try." A few days later at the city courthouse, a hearing was scheduled. The judge, a woman with a firm posture and a maternal gaze, presided over the session. Dr. Elizabeth, the prosecutor, defended the suspension of Livia's custody of the baby, based on the girl's age and the profound psychological impact. The public defender, on the other hand, asked for sensitivity. She reminded them that separating the two could reinforce the trauma and erase the chance of healing that could arise from this bond. The judge listened, patiently. Then she asked to speak to Livia, alone, in an adjoining room. The two sat down. Silence at first. The judge observed her with tenderness and seriousness. "You understand that taking care of a baby requires a lot, right?" "Yes. And I know I can't do it alone. So, why do you want to keep him?" Livia thought for a moment. Then she answered, with a firmness that was rare for her 10 years. "Because he's all that's left of me. And because, if he grows up far away, he might think he was made by mistake. And I want him to know that he was made by survival." The judge didn't say anything. She just wrote something down in her notebook. A few days later, the decision was made public. Camila would have temporary custody of the baby. Livia would remain as the legal mother, but without full responsibilities. Until she was considered emotionally ready. The baby would grow up by their side, in a protected environment, with psychological support, with constant supervision from a safety net. Livia was no longer a silent child. She was slowly beginning to write her own story. It was the only possible agreement. Neither punishment, nor abandonment. In the last scene of that night, Livia sat next to the crib. The baby was sleeping. She, with a small flashlight on, drew in an old notebook. A sun, a house, a girl with braids, and a baby in her arms. This time no shadows, no locked doors, just the light coming in through the window. The news, even though it was under judicial secrecy, spread through the small town like wildfire. Leaked information was distorted on social media and in conversation circles. Names were not mentioned, but the phrase was repeated. The girl was pregnant by her own brother. For many, a symbol of horror. For others, a cry of resistance. At the school where Livia studied, the subject was whispered among teachers and classmates. She had not yet returned to in-person classes. But the guardianship council was already meeting with the principal to plan her reintegration. The principal, a pragmatic woman, was direct. The school needs to welcome, but also prepare. Children don't know how to deal with this. And parents, even less so. The school's psychologist suggested a gradual return plan, with discussion circles, workshops on empathy, and a mediator accompanying Livia in the first few days. Because, despite everything, Livia was still just a child trying to return to the world. At home, the baby was beginning to react to stimuli. He was already smiling. He was already recognizing voices, especially Livia's. She, in turn, got closer every day. She gave him a bottle. She picked him up. She slept with the crib next to the bed. But, more than actions, his eyes had changed. It was no longer just fear. It was not just trauma. Now there was also affection. Fragile but real. Growing slowly. Like a flower planted in arid soil. Meanwhile, the case against her brother was moving forward. At the initial hearing, he appeared handcuffed. He avoided looking at his family. Roberto was present. Camila was not. She had decided, I don't want to see my son. Not like that. Not after what he did. Livia didn't go either. But she left something with her lawyer, a letter. Short. Handwritten. The judge opened it. She read it. And before closing the session, she asked permission to quote the girl's words. I don't want revenge. I just want him to never again have the power to erase someone like he almost erased me. The prosecution, led by Dr. Elizabeth, asked for the maximum sentence for rape of a vulnerable person, aggravated by blood ties. The defense tried to argue emotional instability. They claimed no violent intent. They spoke of family trauma, of lost youth, of mental confusion. The judge listened. But then she interrupted. Confusion is when someone gets lost on a difficult path. What happened here was a choice. Repeated. Conscious. Cowardly. Silence in the room. And the gavel had not yet fallen. But there. At that moment, justice already had a name. Livia. The absence of screams is not the absence of violence. A child does not need to bleed to be destroyed. The judge's words echoed for days. The trial was postponed to the next phase. But the weight of the sentence was already in the air. The following week, Livia returned to school. It was just one morning. Camila left her at the door, holding her light blue backpack tightly. Her heart was heavy. Her gaze was full of fear and faith. The hallways seemed bigger. The footsteps echoed as if everyone was listening. And, in fact, they were. Looks appeared in the classroom windows. Some were curious. Others just humans. But Livia walked. Silently. Steady. She reached the classroom. She sat down at her old desk. She took a deep breath. The Portuguese teacher handed out a simple text interpretation activity. Words printed in black and white. Livia picked up the pencil. She read the statement. But in the corner of the paper where no one asked for anything, she wrote a single word. Back. It wasn't about pretending nothing happened. It wasn't about erasing. It was about continuing. Despite everything. That night, with the lights off and the distant sound of the sleeping city, Livia lay down next to the crib. The baby was awake. Eyes wide open. Small hands moving in the air. She picked him up carefully. She placed him on her chest. And she whispered, "One day they'll tell you how you were born. But I promise you'll also know how we lived later." And there, in that moment, Livia fell asleep, with the baby pressed against her heart. 2 light breaths, mixing together. As if, together, they learned to exist. Livia's story does not end with a full stop. She continues. Amid pauses and ellipses. As do lives marked by traumas that cannot be erased, but that, little by little, can be transformed. The city may continue talking, commenting, judging. But there, where it really matters, Livia chose not to be remembered only for what she suffered, but for what she built from it. Her path will not be simple, nor fair in all stretches. But when she returned to school, when she took care of her son, when she wrote that word in the corner of the page, she took an essential step. She claimed the right to start over. And sometimes, a new beginning does not need applause, just space, time, and the courage needed to take a deep breath and move on. Stories like Livia's remind us, life doesn't always allow for easy choices, but it's still possible to find ways back, paths that don't erase the pain, but that build meaning from it. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like. This helps the channel to continue bringing stories that deserve to be heard. Share in the comments what you felt while following this journey. Your voice matters, and it can be a support for those who experience similar silences. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now. Don't miss the next stories. There's an even more impactful video in the description. Watch it later, it might give you a new perspective.